Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Today, the fallout from the French election. US trade talks advancing. Has the Met Police overstepped its remit on Partygate? And a top anti-fracking climate committee chairman's links to gas-producing Qatar. All that to come after your morning headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Police have arrested a man on suspicion of murder after 4 people were stabbed to death in South London. Officers were called to a home in Bermondsey in the early hours of this morning. 3 women and a man were pronounced dead at the scene. It's believed the arrested man knew the victims. Now, in some other news now, casualties have been reported in Ukraine, with the head of the country's railway saying 5 stations have come under fire. As Russia's bombardment continues, the US has promised more than £500 million in military aid, including advanced weapons to help Ukraine. In a show of support, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the Defence Secretary, Lloyd Austin, travelled to Kyiv for the first official US visit to the country since Russia invaded 2 months ago. Boris Johnson has congratulated Emmanuel Macron after the French president beat right-wing opponent Marine Le Pen to win a second term in office. He secured 58% of the vote and is the first French president to be re-elected in 20 years. Well, later, riot police fired tear gas at protesters demonstrating against the result in both cities of Paris and Lyon. Unhappy with his policies, those protesters now face another 5 years of Macron in power. The Duke of Cambridge will lay a wreath at the cenotaph later to commemorate Anzac Day. Earlier, a service was held in Gallipoli in Turkey at dawn to remember the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps personnel who were killed on this day in 1915 during World War I. The military campaign claimed more than 130,000 lives. You're up to date. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now let's head back to The Briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and you're watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and on your radio. Turning to Partygate now, as last week the Met Police announced no new fixed penalty notice orders will be announced until after the local elections. Which means that as things stand, all we know in terms of an event that has been deemed to have broken the rules is the one that took place in the Cabinet Room on the 19th of July 2020. To remind ourselves, that is the one that took place after Boris Johnson had birthday celebrations with students, teachers and a cake at a school in front of the media that very morning, published on Number 10's social media. One that happened after lockdown easing meant that you could legally visit ill and dying relatives in hospitals, private houses, hospices or care homes. Easing that reopened non-essential retail. Easing that meant tradespeople had resumed working. Most strikingly of all, of course, the only event for which any cabinet minister has been fined so far is the one that appeared in the pages of the Times newspaper at the time. Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson were reported by senior journalists as attending a small gathering in the cabinet room in what was sympathetically described as at the time as brief respite. And of course, no one minded. So why am I bringing any of this up? Well, when the Metropolitan Police have decided that this event has constituted a technical breach of the rules, well, let's turn to what the then Met Police Commissioner Cressida Dick said when this investigation was launched. Announcing the investigation to the London Assembly at the end of January this year, Dick justified the Met's extraordinarily rare retrospective investigation as being legitimate only if it met certain criteria. Of course, ordinarily, the Met would not retrospectively investigate. Let's take a listen.
But recognising that there might be some occasions where we would investigate retrospectively, we generated some guidelines, only guidelines, but guidelines that we have stuck to. And the occasions on which we have done that have been where we were looking at something which appeared to be the most serious and flagrant type of breach.
Something that appeared to be the most serious and flagrant type of breach. Different people take different views as to whether they think that Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson in the cabinet room with a cake was a technical breach of the rules or not. But I've heard no one remotely serious suggest that particularly what Rishi Sunak is accused of doing constitutes, quote, something that appeared to be the most serious and flagrant type of breach. Let's remember what we're talking about here. People in a room for a meeting singing happy birthday before that meeting started. Not a rave, not a booze-up, not an event at which anyone who attended can be accused of having been in Number 10 illegitimately. Now, you can argue that there may be future events that might reach the, quote, most serious and flagrant bar, but that, for the moment, is speculation. What any dispassionate observer must be able to see is that there is no reasonable case to be made that the 19th of June 2020 event was, by any reasonable definition, something, quote, that appeared to be the most serious and flagrant type of breach. And to that end, it appears that the Metropolitan Police may have stepped beyond their remit that their commissioner had set out. And that raises some big questions about the conduct of this entire investigation. Well, overseas now, Emmanuel Macron has become the first French president to secure a second term in office in 20 years, as he fended off the radical challenger Marine Le Pen in the French election last night. Le Pen secured 42%, while Macron won with over 58% of the vote, and he'll hold the presidency until 2027. Our reporter Paul Hawkins has been in Paris, asking the French people for their thoughts.
It's historic. We never did a score like that. So it's very promising for the future, for the next presidential election. Yes, it's 5 years later, but we are patient.
It was an amazing nightmare because when I heard all the newspaper, all the media, all the supporting people of Macron, if Marine Le Pen will be elected tonight, it will be the end of the world.
You know, I wish things were reversed, and I'm very, very disappointed, of course. But, you know, I kind of expected it because I believe the polls.
I feel sad, obviously, because we lose, of course, but at the same time, I keep hope because our score, is pretty great for us. So it's not too bad.
Paul Hawkins speaking to French activists at Marine Le Pen's event last night. Well, turning back to the home front, controversial green news this morning as one of the government's most senior climate advisers has been accused of wearing two very different hats. Lord Debon, chair of the powerful Climate Change Committee, is also chairman of an international sustainability consultancy, Sancroft International, that has a significant contract with the Qatari government. Now, Qatar is one of Britain's biggest gas suppliers. Lord Debon stands accused of taking Qatari money whilst discouraging the domestic shale gas extraction that so many people want to see. Well, the Conservative peer denies any conflict of interest, saying, quote, "There can be no conflict of interest in advising people everywhere that sustainability demands they move away from fossil fuels, and all correct procedures were followed." Well, to dissect this story further, I'm joined by Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at Net Zero Watch. Welcome to the programme, Harry. It does seem like an extraordinary story that someone who has been fervently campaigning against shale gas extraction at home has got a contract with a country that has been providing our gas that we've been importing.
That's right. These are really serious allegations. What the CCC said in their letter back in February was that there should be a presumption against more oil and gas exploration in the North Sea. The government, of course, has since said that they want to use as many of these resources as they can, and there's an ongoing debate around shale. But to be advising the Qatari government, which is the UK's largest exporter too of natural gas through LNG is really shocking. And what this letter also said was that actually expanding UK oil and gas would increase emissions and mean they had to be offset elsewhere. But I think most independent advisors would acknowledge that UK production actually has lower emissions than the LNG that would be coming from Qatar. So this isn't good for the environment. And I'm afraid with Debon, we have seen these kind of stories before. Just a few years ago, evidence was released that revealed that he had taken hundreds of thousands of pounds through his sustainability consultancy, yet again, Sancroft, that appeared to be conflicts of interests. And at no point was it investigated by the Cabinet Office whether these were actually conflicts with his role as CCC chairman. What the government appears to be doing is allowing the CCC to regulate its own conflicts of interest. And this is where the really big problem lies, because they just give him the all clear and then he continues in this role. I don't see how these interests can possibly be appropriate for someone who's chairing this organisation, and so it can't simply be left for this organisation to monitor its own sort of ethics and conflicts of interest internally.
Now, some people might very well agree with that point, but also point to the fact that the government hasn't taken on the CCC's advice. There seems to be political support for further extraction of our own gas in the North Sea in particular, and potentially we're reopening that door to British natural shale gas extraction as well, with the review that is coming in the coming weeks and months as well. So does this really matter when the government hasn't paid attention or hasn't done the bidding of this committee?
Well, this committee is extraordinarily influential, and they've gone against their advice on this occasion, and I think that's a good thing. But we have to remember the CCC has a statutory role to advise the government on its climate change targets. It's constantly providing advice to the government in a wide range of areas relating to energy and climate change. And so for Lord Deben to have these interests through Sancroft actually bears on many different topics that the government is being advised on. And he's managed to sort of hide these interests through his consultancy, Sancroft, which allows him to just declare Sancroft without actually saying who the clients are. And it's only through investigative journalistic work that actually some of these interests have been exposed. But there just doesn't seem to have been the requirements upon him to declare his clients. And so every time they're revealed, he's facing new scandals. Someone who had been this scandal hit that was a minister or in any other senior role in public life, surely they would be long gone by now.
No, that is a fair point, I suppose, to compare the scrutiny that Lord Deben gets compared to the scrutiny of cabinet ministers. However, in his response to this story, Lord Deben has said that he hasn't been advising the Qatari government to export more gas, but to move away from gas, to promote renewables, as his energy sustainability consultancy does with all of its clients. Is that not a fair point, that he hasn't been saying anything untoward to anyone, that he has been encouraging countries the world over to move away from hydrocarbons?
I think the important principle here is that one shouldn't be using public positions in this way to actually facilitate one's business interests. That is the definition of a conflict of interest. So when Lord Deben is making all these contacts in the sustainability sector, he's doing so really largely through his reputation and prestige as chairman of the Committee on Climate Change. And he's making these connections and then exploiting them for his business interests. So even if they're claiming that they're advising to do certain things, these are relations that are privileged by his access as chairman of this important organisation. And I think it's really important that there is a clear separation of those business interests and the interests that he has as chairman of the CCC. And there just doesn't seem to have been any scrutiny, as you say, of whether these companies and whether these clients of Sancroft are really compatible with this role that he has.
No, really interesting story there. Harry Wilkinson, thank you so much for talking through that there. Now, next today, Joe Biden's trade representative arrived in Aberdeen yesterday, ahead of trade talks this morning. The International Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan will host her American counterpart, Ambassador Catherine Tay, alongside other government, industry and trade union leaders for what's being billed as a second transatlantic trade dialogue with the United States. Well, joining me now is Laurie Laird, Director of European Media Relations at Crosby Vollmer and US economics commentator. Good morning, Laurie. Good morning. Welcome to the programme. This is a pretty exciting development. I don't think anyone's expecting a fully fledged free trade agreement with the United States anytime soon. What do these talks mean?
I'm glad that you said that, because every time we have a talk about a free trade agreement between the UK and the US, I'm always a little bit touched by the optimism in this country that some kind of free trade agreement may result. The US is not a free trading country at the world, and we thought so much about Donald Trump and the tariffs that he put on people. You know, he called himself tariff man. Joe Biden is equally he's an equally unfree trader. Does that make sense? He's equally dubious about free trade. He's just a lot more quiet about it. There is absolutely no indication at the moment that America is looking for a free trade deal with the UK or anyone else.
It's interesting that the conversation in the United States seems to have moved a very long way from the Reagan-Clinton, I suppose, almost consensus that trade was good, that NAFTA was established, that all of these sort of this liberalisation of the 90s. Now it seems to have moved in both parties the other way.
You make a very good point, because it used to be traditionally that the Republicans were very much free traders. They could see the economic benefits that it brought to both America and the wider world. It's always the Democrats that have been a little bit more dubious. Democrats have always wanted to look at labor standards to make sure that things weren't made in faraway countries where people were paid less and could undercut American workers. But now in America, we do seem to see both. There's a bipartisan consensus at the moment on very, very little, except for the fact that Americans are not thinking that free trade is a particularly good thing. And to put this in perspective, at the moment, America is still imposing levies on UK steel and UK aluminium. Those are tariffs that were imposed by Donald Trump in 2018. They're coming off in June, but they still are in effect right now. So it gives you a sense that America's not that keen for a free trade deal.
Taken a long time, although there have been tariffs that the United States had placed upon the United Kingdom on Scotch whisky, for example, that have been removed.
Absolutely.
And it's significant that the US Trade Representative has come to Aberdeen in Scotland. What can we read into that?
Absolutely. And I think, and looking at the Scottish press, they are absolutely delighted. And the only real coverage of this that I have seen so far is in the Scottish press. Nothing in the U.S. press. She will come down. Catherine Tai will come down to London tomorrow. I suspect that will be where we'll see perhaps more significant talks. But it's really difficult to see where any common ground will exist. And don't forget, when Joe Biden says he's an Irish American, believe him. He is looking. I suspect that everyone in the administration is looking at these headlines that have arisen over the past couple of days. UK thinking again about tearing up the Northern Irish Protocol. That does not play well in the White House. And I think difficulties over Northern Ireland, America's questions over Britain's attitude toward Northern Ireland are why those tariffs that I mentioned earlier on steel and aluminium were lifted on the EU 6 months ago, but not on the UK. And every negative headline or any kind of strife on that Northern Irish Protocol is going to take the US and the UK further apart.
So Joe Biden is not going to be signing any FTA with the United Kingdom anytime soon, but talking to ministers in the United Kingdom, there's been a big focus on the state level, on state-level chambers of commerce, on our trade representatives going out to various places, whether it be Florida, whether it be Texas, whether it be some of the new exciting growth areas of the United States, and really trying to boost trade, not in terms of tariff terms, but in terms of state-level regulation and
absolutely.
goodwill.
And a lot of things happen at state level in the U.S., and certainly there will be personal relationships that develop. But in terms of a free trade deal, it's to a certain extent in the U.K., it's be careful what you wish for. A lot of the things that U.S. manufacturers, U.S. farmers in particular, will insist upon may not be palatable to us in the U.K. Things like hormone-treated beef, things like chlorinated, the ever-present chlorinated chicken that we've been talking about
Which
for
we're
years.
we're fine in the United Kingdom to wash our salads in chlorine, but washing
But the
chicken in chlorine, that's beyond the pale. Yeah.
But, and some of this is really hyped up by the media, but certainly there is an adversity or an opposition to some of the sanitary standards that we see in the U.S. You can bet that whoever is doing a trade deal on the U.S. side is going to push for that agricultural access.
So looking potentially towards 2024, where there may well be a change of personnel in the White House, is it any more likely that the Republican Party would be looking towards a trade deal with the United Kingdom more favourably? Or are we at a stage where both the Republicans and the Democrats are pretty isolationist?
I think your optimism is absolutely touching. I don't see it at the moment. And in fact, we're seeing so many other, even more free trading areas talking about nearshoring, bringing production, the means of production, back to domestic headquarters because of these supply chain bottlenecks that we have seen after COVID. So there's not a lot of sentiment worldwide for this, and in the U.S., not a chance. As I say, the one thing that you can find Democrats and Republicans agreeing upon right now, and look at Joe Biden. He has opened up an office called Made in America Office. He wants to have a lot more procurement brought back to the U.S. The feeling isn't there right now. When we have a lot of big economists saying this is the end of globalization. How long this phase will last is unclear, but the sentiment doesn't seem to be there right now.
And just finally in this conversation, that has a bit of a worrying consequence for America's place as the world's leading superpower.
Absolutely.
The United Kingdom is looking at signing a trade deal with India by the end of the year. Of course, China has been ever present and growing in terms of its share of global GDP. Does America's retreat from the world, its reticence to sign new trade agreements, does that spell the end of the American era?
It certainly will make things a lot more expensive for American consumers. If you're taking things that were made more cheaply abroad and trying to make them onshore, things will be a lot more expensive. Whether this reshoring actually happens or whether it's a bit of a buzzword right now is a little bit of an open question. And you mentioned the hopes of an Indian trade deal. Please forgive my cynicism, and I sound so doom and gloom right now, but it does feel a little bit like that trip to India, like that we hope to have a free trade deal with India by October. Feels a little bit cynical. Boris Johnson needed to come up with something. He needed to change the conversation. I suspect we're a long way away from a trade deal with India.
Well, we'll have to have you back in October and see exactly how this has gone forward. But thank you so much for talking us through the American trade representative coming to Aberdeen today, of course. Now, the UK was the world's 4th largest military spender last year, with a defence budget of around £45 billion, according to a new report. It comes in a year that saw increased volatility and instability across the globe, push worldwide military spending to more than $2 trillion for the first time. Our security editor, Mark White, has a breakdown of the figures.
As many countries readjust to an increasingly uncertain and volatile global landscape, world military spending has reached an all-time high, passing $2.1 trillion for the first time, the 7th consecutive year that military spending has increased. Once again, the United States is by far the world's biggest military spender, with a budget of $801 billion last year, down slightly on the previous year. But overall, the US military spending on research and development has risen by 24% over the past decade, indicating an increasing determination to focus on next-generation technologies. Washington sees Beijing as the fastest-growing military threat. Understandably, China is the 2nd largest military spender, with a budget now topping $293 billion, up another 4.7%. It is China's 27th consecutive year of military growth, and it's had other Indo-Pacific countries like Japan and Australia scrambling to increase their military budgets. Just behind India, the United Kingdom is the world's 4th largest military spender, with a budget last year of around £45 billion. With the standing army decreasing to a figure near 70,000 and concerns over a lack of big-ticket items like ships, tanks and aircraft, there is still some way to go before the UK Ministry of Defence is seen as getting value for money on its procurement of weapons systems.
The UK has always been a top global spender. Might not be at the same level as China or the US, but it's always been, top 5, top 10 most recently. And I mean, again, it has a vast and very well-equipped military that it needs to maintain. The country itself is also investing a vast amount of financial resources into, Air Force and the Royal Navy as a way of kind of building up its military.
Russia has again made it into the top 5 military spenders, with a budget last year of $65 billion. Unsurprisingly, expenditure increased by almost 3%, boosted by additional oil and gas sales as Moscow built up its forces along the Ukrainian border. And with increasing instability across the globe, military analysts predict this year's defence spending will again hit record levels.
Mark White there talking through exactly what's going on with defence spending around the world. Now, just in the final minute of the programme, I'm delighted to say, because we don't get often time to do this, I can go through some of the views that you have been emailing in your many, many numbers. I'd like to say Lynn has emailed in to talk about what about Starmer and his beer and pizza party with the police commissioner in Durham. That's a really interesting point and one that Tories have been bringing up more. I've also had a message in about Biden saying saying, is he making America great again? It does sound a little bit Trump-like, doesn't it? His policy there as well. And also, RS, someone called RS Roger has emailed in to say, so good to hear Tom Harwood highlight the nonsense that is Partygate. Well, we like to give different views on this channel, not things that you'd hear elsewhere. So thank you everyone for emailing in. I'll be back at 9:30 tomorrow morning, but coming up, it's The Point with Patrick and Mercy, so you won't want to miss that. Before then, it's the weather.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking bright for many. However, there will be some showers across England and Wales. Let's have a little look at those details. Zooming into the south and west, and for much of the region, it will be dry with some spells of sunshine. However, 1 or 2 showers may develop, especially across that eastern area. Moving further towards London, and the showers are more likely to be widespread across the southeast of England and across East Anglia, with 1 or 2 heavier showers also possible. Parts of Wales may also see a few showers today, but many more here will remain dry with some spells of sunshine across most of the region. The majority of the showers across the Midlands will initially be